define me, but it is part of me, and it defines part of me, and I can totally do this. And it made me miss certain things about being in the kitchen, and also come to think about like, well, I can do my own thing. I can change things that I don't like. You know,
you can make your own culture,
and I can make my own culture, and
creating a culture of care.
And I did, and I came back and after reading that book and kind of like getting falling back in love with the idea of cooking and professionally being in a kitchen and thinking about what the possibilities were, and I decided to start something, and I found Nick's.
Was it already
it was a little old diner. It was a late night diner that I had used to go to when I was in college, and I had since moved into the neighborhood here in the same house, and I was walking up the street one night, you know, with one of my buddies who lived on the third floor at the time, and we were like, you know, we probably coming from Murphy's or something, and like walking up the street, and Nick didn't open at that point in his career. Like, he didn't open until 1 o'clock in the morning. He'd open at 1 o'clock in the morning and stay open till 11 o'clock in the morning, and get the third shift.
Great shift.
The third shift, right? And restaurant, hotel, bar, nightclub, police, medical, you know, dancers, like, I mean, everybody, you know. And at the time there were like several places like that in the city.
Yeah,
there was a lot of violence in the city and late night shootings and things that happened very soon after that period, where a lot of those places and people just starting to age out. I think a combination of that
closed down,
like and a lot of them closed up. But anyway, Nick was this tiny little old, 4 foot something like guy, hard of hearing, this huge personality, but tiny, cantankerous, feisty little old Italian guy, right? Who's hard of hearing, and he would yell like everything, and it was like such a scene and a funny like thing to be in there, like late at night, just to have. And it was cheap. It's like 2 eggs over.
Because he'd be like talking to his staff all loud.
Yeah, it was just him.
It was just him. Okay.
And he was yelling at people. We went there so much that, like, you know, we kind of developed like a rapport and an affection for the guy. And if he got really busy, especially towards the end, like he was in his late 70s.
Yeah.
And he's still doing it by himself. We'd like jump back there and help him.
Oh, that's
and, like,
fucking
you know,
awesome.
And he'd yell at us, "No, get the eggs, or get the coffee. Put the coffee on, Derek." You know, and we were eating it up because we were like having the bag or like a couple of drinks, or it was just fun. It was like fun, but we were trying to help him. We weren't like, you know, mocking him or anything. And we're trying to make sure he was okay. And we were like, anyway, so that, like, I had that history built up of that space. You know, I'm walking home that night, and my friend Carl and I would see, and Nick is just kind of like, it wasn't 1 o'clock, so he wasn't open, but he was sitting at the counter and he was all like slumped over, and I was like banging on the window. I'm like, you know, and he looks up and he sees me, because I just want to make sure he was alive. He looks up and he sees me, and he goes like this. He motions me to come in, and this is a guy that was always just full of so much piss and vinegar, and just kind of defeated. He just goes, "Derek, I don't think I can do this anymore. You know, and we were talking. I'm like, I'm sorry, Nick. Are you all right? Like, and he's just like, you know, do you know anybody that might want to buy the place? And I'm like, nah. And then I don't know what the fuck I was thinking. You know, liquid courage, time, place, energy. Like,
you're like, I bought a house already.
I'm like,
might as well.
I bought the house a year earlier. Yeah. I'm like, so in my home, and it needed so much work. I'm like, I'm kind of stuck here.
Yeah.
Right? And I really I was thinking, if I'm going to be a chef, I got to get out of prep. I'm going to move to New York. I'm going to move to Chicago. I'm going to move to San Francisco, somewhere, you know, the it cities.
Yeah.
Because that's what you have to do to make it in this business, right? But there was part of me that resented that also. Like, it was just like,
why not us?
Yeah, why not us?
Fucking
why
Providence?
Not us? Why do I have to go somewhere and prove myself to a bunch of strangers? Like, what about where I'm from? What about my community? What about my thing? So there was like, you know, there's so many different emotions that were all in situations that were sort of converging, and just this epiphany, to distill it all down, kind of came to me. I said to him, like, Nick, let me give it some thought. Maybe I'll do it, and only half serious, but not bullshitting, but like at the same time, just like, I'll think about it, like knowing I had no money. He fucking called me the next day. I was, he's like, and he wouldn't let up, and he was just like, you want to come and talk about it? What do you think? And I'm like, okay, like I'll come and talk to you. But and he forced me to actually consider it and be serious, because I told him that I would think about it. And, and the more I thought about it, the more I was just like, maybe I can do this, And I ended up getting a friend of mine who was one of my roommates, but had moved back to New Jersey. I called him up. His dad had always said, like, hey, like, when you guys are ready, I'll back you guys in a restaurant, right? And he moved back home to New Jersey, but I called him up. I'm like, Brian, I have this opportunity to buy Nick's. Like, do you think you want to move back up here and we can do it together?
Yeah.
Right? And he was cushy and living at home with mom and dad, like a lot of my friends from New Jersey.
He's like, stressed?
Yeah.
I don't think so.
He's like, I don't know, maybe. But his dad overheard the conversation, and he was like, let me talk to him, thinking that he would ignite some inspiration in his son to like come back up and do it. He's like, well, let's talk. Maybe I'll do it. And he became my partner. My friend never moved back up here, so he was like my long distance business partner for like the first year. And with his credit, we had a couple credit cards, and he invested like 20 grand, for 23 grand, and like just his credit cards. I started the restaurant, and we were 50-50 in the first year, and I ended up buying him out. I took a second mortgage on this house, which was going to be to fix the house because it was falling apart, and I ended up using it to buy him out.
Yeah.
Because he wanted to he realized his son was going to stay down there, and he wanted to be down there, and I really wanted full control over everything that was going on there. And I did that, and here we are, almost 20 years later. That was 2001.
Now, they always say you don't break even until the third or fourth or fifth year. Like, what was your deal with that?
He's like 15 years, man. I'm still broke.
Yeah, I'm still broke. Well, I took a different arc, and if the business had stayed what it was, you could see, you'd be able to do that. But everything was growth for me. We've been on a constant growth pattern. I was renting there. It was an 18-seat restaurant, and then we opened for nothing, like on a shoestring. But it's like laughable to think about how much money we had to open, that we got that restaurant open with. And it was like everything got reinvested, paying down debt. And then once we started to pay down the debt and steam started to build up, there was a situation there where it was like, this space isn't going to work for us anymore.
Yeah.
Like,
that must have been a good feeling.
I started looking to rent somewhere else, or again, this like entrepreneurial craziness, like, where I'm like, well, why rent if I could buy something? Let's look and see if that's an option. Because to me, like, again, like, it was just like, you got to be the master of your own destiny, which isn't, correct, but was my narrative. It was my perspective at the time. And like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to work for myself. I'm going to be self-employed. If I'm going to do this again, if I'm going to go through this again, with all the shit that I was going through with the landlords and the work the building needed and the space needed, and dumping money into the space only to have my rent go up, and to have, or for them to finally do work that they were supposed to be doing for a year and then
Years,
not pull permits, and to have the fire department and the building inspector come and try to shut the restaurant down because they were doing work in their building without permits, and like all these crazy things that were going on that was just like, I need to remove this piece out of the equation. So I found the building that we're in now, took a second mortgage out on my house, put a down payment on this building, got my dad to retire from his other job, and one of the jobs he had always done my whole life, second and third job, was carpentry, and that was his passion, even though he couldn't do it full time all the time. So I got him to retire, quote unquote, and come help me with the building. And for 2.5 years, that little tiny shop paid for, my 18-seat restaurant, no liquor license, paid to get that restaurant, that building built, and it was a piece of shit building. The roof was caving in. That was the only reason I was able to afford it.
Yeah.
And but we've never been afraid of hard work, so we did that. So I mean, kind of like it's hard to answer the question that you asked about, when do you see that break even, because I've never seen it, right? Like, and
because you're always constantly
we're constantly like building for the future and reinvesting, and it's been evolving the whole time. So it's really hard to look at it as like a clear cut financial piece and say, we
were doing good here. Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can look at business, just the arc of like business, and say revenue did X, Y, and Z here, but in relevance to expenses, it's almost like felt like it's never been like, because it's been a passion project, and like, I've always like, we buy great ingredients, we pay decent wages, we put a lot of craft and artistry into what we do. We try to use smaller producers when we can, and those things cost more money, and we're giving back and doing charity work and doing all these different pieces that are costly and eat away and erode those the P word, the profit. But I look back at what we've done, and there's been some real hard times, and this year was the toughest of the toughest, but I started the business after, like, during 9/11. Like, that was awful experience. We got through that. A few years later, there was like the station fire, which just
that was that nightclub
gripped the entire Rhode Island. There was a nightclub fire, but which impacted the music and entire state by the heartstrings, but also totally shifted and changed the operational procedures and guidelines of how to operate,
fire marshals,
how to operate a restaurant, and anything like that. And I mean, catastrophically.
Yeah, this shit happened, 40 minutes from here?
Yeah, not even. Yeah, it was in Warwick. It was West Warwick.
Right?
It was like
I drive by that building sometimes, and I'm like,
I was driving by it the night. We're not right by it on the street, but I had band practice at a studio in West Warwick. That night, I didn't know that show was going on. It was it was the Great Way. It was like an 80s rock band. Like, it wasn't my scene, but like, I just remember driving home that night and seeing smoke, just thinking it's a Warwick factory, whatever. And finding out the next morning at Nick's, like when I'm opening and the paper on the counter, and I'm like,
what? Yeah, that was devastating.
And it was awful. But, beyond the emotional, it also changed our industry, and it changed like what it took to be able to open and operate, and the costs involved and the steps involved. And fast forward, opening, moving there, opening a new space, going through the legal and zoning and permitting, and it was crazy. Anyway, but like to go, I mean, I could spend an hour on every single one of these, every single one of these stories, and hopefully it's not too all over the place.
No,
but
it's
like,
all good.
I started with nothing. We started the business out of, with with some equity from my house. Then I bought my partner out with some equity from my house. Then I